He was the face of a revolution. Chuck Liddell, with his wild mohawk and devastating knockout power, carried the UFC from obscurity into the mainstream. But while fans remember the brutal knockouts, the belt, and the warrior spirit, few know the truth about what came after the octagon. Chuck once stood at the top of the fight world. Now, he struggles with money, memory, and a public image clouded by regret. From reality shows to courtroom battles, from fortune to financial distress, this is the haunting story of what happens when your legacy fades and the world moves on without you. Stay with us as we dive into the tragic lifestyle of Chuck Liddell, a legend who gave everything to the sport and was left with almost nothing. Before Chuck Liddell became a name that sent chills through locker rooms and echoed in UFC arenas around the world, he was just a scrappy kid from Santa Barbara, California, a city better known for its beaches than for breeding world-class fighters. Born on December 17, 1969, Charles David Liddell was raised by a single mother, and by the time he was a teenager, he'd already been introduced to the world of combat through boxing lessons with his grandfather. But what started as a way to keep the angry kid off the streets quickly grew into something else entirely, a hunger to dominate, to rise, to matter. Chuck's early years were spent in modest homes, and although the family didn't have much money, he was rich in grit. In high school, he excelled in football and wrestling, eventually earning a scholarship to California Polytechnic State University, where he became a Division I wrestler and earned a degree in accounting. But Liddell had no plans to become a desk jockey. While studying, he also trained in Koei-kan karate, and that's where the first seeds of the Iceman were planted. When Chuck Liddell entered the mixed martial arts scene in the late 1990s, the sport wasn't glamorous. It was blood, grit, and survival. Liddell made his UFC debut in 1998, and within a few short years, he became one of the promotion's most feared knockout artists. His mohawk and icy stare weren't just branding, they were warnings. By the time he was crowned the UFC light heavyweight champion in 2005, Chuck had defeated legends like Randy Couture, Tito Ortiz, and Kevin Randleman. Fans weren't just watching his fights, they were watching bodies drop. Chuck's power wasn't just in his fists, it was in his ability to sell tickets, pack arenas, and bring mainstream credibility to a sport that was still considered fringe. He became the face of the UFC during its pivotal boom years, appearing on TV shows, gracing the cover of magazines, and even getting roles in movies. For a while, Chuck Liddell wasn't just winning fights, he was winning life. But what goes up fast often crashes even harder. Chuck Liddell's meteoric rise in the UFC brought him fame, riches, and the kind of respect fighters spend a lifetime chasing. But behind the knockouts and pay-per-view bonuses was a quiet, ticking clock. And in combat sports, that clock almost always runs out before the fighter knows it. By the time Chuck hit his mid-30s, something had changed. His once iron chin, the stuff of legend, had begun to fail him. In 2007, the unthinkable happened. He was knocked out cold by Quinton "Rampage" Jackson in front of a packed crowd. It wasn't just a loss, it was a sign. Over the next few years, the man who had once destroyed careers with a single punch found himself on the receiving end of brutal finishes. He lost 5 of his last 6 fights, 4 of them by knockout. Each time he hit the canvas, fans winced, not just from the impact, but from the realization that the Iceman was melting in real time. But Chuck refused to stop. Fighters rarely know when to walk away, especially legends. The UFC, out of concern for his health, essentially forced him into retirement in 2010. UFC President Dana White publicly begged Chuck to stay out of the cage. "He's a good friend," Dana said in interviews, "and I don't want to see him get hurt anymore." For a while, Chuck listened. He took a behind-the-scenes role with the UFC, collecting a paycheck without taking punches. But it didn't last. In 2018, Chuck Liddell came out of retirement at age 48 to fight his old rival Tito Ortiz in a pay-per-view event promoted by Oscar De La Hoya's Golden Boy MMA. The result was heartbreaking. Tito knocked him out in the first round, and fans around the world cringed. This wasn't the Chuck they remembered. This was a slowed-down, glass-jawed version of a once unbreakable warrior. And the saddest part? He seemed to be the only one who didn't see it coming. By the end of the 2010s, Chuck Liddell wasn't the UFC superstar anymore. He was a retired fighter with a battered brain, a faded reputation, and no clear path forward. forward. While many thought he was living the high life after making millions in the UFC, the truth was far murkier. In interviews, Chuck began opening up about memory loss and confusion. Years of wars in the cage had taken a toll not just on his body, but on his mind. Like many fighters from his era, Chuck showed early signs of CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a degenerative brain condition caused by repeated head trauma. Friends noticed he would forget conversation, lose his train of thought, and zone out mid-sentence. And yet, he was still trying to live like the Iceman, attending nightclubs, drinking heavily, and clinging to the party lifestyle that had once been fun but now felt tragic. In 2021, things took another dark turn. Chuck was arrested at his home on suspicion of domestic battery following an alleged altercation with his wife, although charges were later dropped and the incident was classified as a family disturbance. The event marked a new low in Liddell's personal life. He released a statement saying he had been the victim and voluntarily took the blame to protect his family, but the damage to his public image was already done. The once beloved UFC icon now appeared in tabloid headlines instead of sports pages. His Instagram posts, which once showed training montages and sponsor shoutouts, now featured long-winded rants, cryptic messages, or sponsored ads that felt hollow. Chuck was clearly grasping for identity, relevance, something. And while he occasionally appeared on podcasts or at UFC events, he was no longer the Iceman. He was a symbol of what happens when combat sports legends age out of the spotlight with no roadmap for life after the fight. Behind every MMA superstar's legacy lies a harsh financial reality. The money doesn't last forever. Chuck Liddell was once one of the highest-paid fighters in the UFC. At the peak of his career, he was earning over $1 million per fight through base pay, pay-per-view points, and endorsements. But unlike athletes in other sports, MMA fighters didn't have long-term retirement plans, union protections, or pensions. The brutal truth? Chuck made millions, but he also spent millions, and fast. He lived like a rock star in the 2000s, with a mansion in Calabasas, lavish parties, luxury vehicles, and frequent international travel. His name carried weight, and people treated him like royalty. But after his forced retirement in 2010, the checks stopped coming in. He lost his UFC ambassador salary when the company was sold to WME-IMG in 2016. It was a quiet firing. No big headlines, just a private call and a goodbye. And with that, Chuck lost his last consistent income stream from the company he helped build. Over the next few years, Chuck appeared at small fan expos, autograph signings, and the occasional podcast, but none of it compared to his prime earnings. The UFC didn't offer him a coaching role or a brand ambassador position, despite his legacy. By 2020, Chuck Liddell was no longer rich, at least not in the way fans assumed. In fact, behind the scenes, he was downsizing, selling off assets, trying to recapture something that felt like stability. And still, he kept showing up. Whether it was in Las Vegas at a UFC event or at a gym opening in Middle America, Chuck smiled, posed for pictures, and acted like everything was okay. But friends close to him said otherwise. They noticed the stress. They heard the concern in his voice. He had gone from multimillionaire athlete to a former celebrity clinging to relevance, and it was eating at him quietly. Chuck Liddell's 2018 return to fighting wasn't just ill-advised, it was heartbreaking. At 48 years old, Chuck announced that he was stepping back into the cage to fight Tito Ortiz for a third time. For hardcore fans, it was a shocking move. He hadn't fought in 8 years. His chin had already failed him in multiple fights, and his reflexes, once sharp as a blade, had dulled with age. But Chuck insisted he felt great. He told reporters he was in the best shape of his life and promised he'd shock the world. In reality, most knew what was coming, and it wasn't a fairy tale ending. Promoted by Oscar De La Hoya's Golden Boy MMA, the bout was awkward from the start. There was almost no buzz. Ticket sales were slow. Fight week interviews felt forced. And worst of all, Chuck didn't look ready. His training clips revealed sluggish footwork, slow punches, and a man who looked more like a grandfather than a gladiator. When the fight happened on November 24, 2018, the result was devastating. Tito Ortiz, the same man Chuck had embarrassed years earlier, knocked him out cold in the first round. It wasn't competitive, it wasn't exciting, it was uncomfortable. Chuck went down with a thud, and the arena fell silent. What was meant to be a heroic comeback became a grim reminder of how far he had fallen. The reaction from the MMA world was brutal. Fighters and fans alike begged him to never fight again. Even Tito, after the fight, seemed remorseful, embracing Chuck in the ring and saying, "He's a legend. I didn't want to hurt him." But the damage had already been done, not just physically, but emotionally and reputationally. Chuck Liddell didn't just lose that night, he lost a part of his legacy. What had once been a career filled with iconic knockouts and crowd-roaring finishes had now ended with pity. And in the days that followed, Chuck disappeared from public view. No big press tour, no new announcements, just silence and regret. Chuck Liddell's biggest battle now isn't with another fighter, it's with his own body and mind. Years of absorbing punches, head kicks, and brutal knockouts have left him grappling with the very thing that once made him a superstar. His brain, CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, isn't just a buzzword in combat sports anymore. It's real, it's irreversible, and Chuck's life shows every sign that he's living with it. In interviews over the last few years, Chuck has admitted to frequent memory lapses. He sometimes forgets names, loses track of conversations, and finds himself zoning out for long stretches. People close to him say he repeats stories, misplaces things, and occasionally becomes paranoid or withdrawn. These are classic early warning signs of neurological trauma, the kind that gets worse with time. Chuck has tried to keep a brave face. He's done podcasts, spoken at events, and even hosted seminars. But there's a visible weight to him now. His once fiery energy is dulled, his words are slower, his posture, once upright and intimidating, now slouches under the burden of years of abuse. He's haunted, not by the men he knocked out, but by what those fights did to him. And perhaps the most tragic part? He knows it. He's talked about the risks of fighting, and has warned young fighters about chasing too many paydays. But it's clear he wishes someone had stopped him, really stopped him, before it got this bad. Because now, Chuck Liddell lives in a strange limbo. He's not in the spotlight, but he's not invisible either. He's stuck between what he was and what he's become. And unlike his days in the cage, there's no clear opponent to beat, just time and the slow unraveling of a once unbreakable warrior. Today, Chuck Liddell still resides in California, but the energy in his home doesn't reflect the glory it once held. At the height of his career, Chuck lived in a sprawling Calabasas mansion, a symbol of success filled with championship belts, signed gloves, and memorabilia from an era when he ruled the cage. But now, despite the house remaining, its atmosphere is eerily quiet. The visitors are fewer, the spotlight has dimmed, and the lifestyle that once buzzed with media interviews and celebratory parties has fallen into silence. Sources close to Chuck say he still walks through that home like a ghost in a museum, each room packed with relics of his fighting past, but few signs of his present or future. The once lavish backyard, built for entertaining, rarely sees guests. Even his once active gym in the garage collects more dust than sweat these days. For a man who used to thrive in noise, whether it was from the crowd or the chaos of family, the quiet is deafening. Chuck's marriage also ended in heartbreak. In 2021, he filed for divorce from his wife, Heidi Northcott. The announcement came just months after the domestic incident that made headlines, the same incident that, although dismissed by the courts, led to irreversible damage in their relationship. Their split marked a turning point. While they had tried to present a united front through the years, insiders say the tension behind closed doors had been simmering for some time. The divorce not only strained his emotional health, but it also chipped away at his financial standing. Legal fees, asset division, and the cost of maintaining his property without dual income placed a heavy burden on him. What was once a home filled with family warmth and activity is now more like a shrine to the past. And Chuck walks its halls like a man who doesn't quite know what to do with what's left. Chuck Liddell always had a taste for fast cars. In his prime, his garage was home to high-performance machines, a Bentley Continental GT, a Hummer H2, a Ferrari, and multiple custom choppers. These weren't just luxury items, they were trophies, physical manifestations of a man who had once dominated a sport and earned the right to flaunt it. But today, much of that garage is empty. Today, a few vehicles remain, but most were sold quietly during the post-UFC years. The maintenance costs were high, and Chuck's need for cash became too pressing to justify keeping depreciating assets around. His financial footprint has significantly shrunk. Once estimated to be worth upwards of $15 million, Chuck's net worth today hovers closer to $500,000 to $1 million. And some estimates suggest even that may be inflated. With limited recurring income, no major sponsorships, and appearances that barely pay the bills, Chuck has quietly downsized his lifestyle, even though he tries to maintain the image of a legend still living large. But behind the designer sunglasses and the social media smiles lies a man barely holding it all together. The biggest tragedy, though, isn't the loss of money or fame. It's the growing distance between him and his children. Chuck has 3 kids, and by all accounts, he deeply loves them. He's posted tributes to them on Father's Day, shared moments on Instagram, and even tried to get them involved in fitness. But divorce, mental decline, and the emotional walls he's built around himself have taken a toll. He doesn't see them as often as he wants to, and when he does, the moments are short-lived, not the kind of long, stable presence he used to promise them during his prime. Friends say that Chuck struggles with his sense of self more than ever. He used to be the Iceman, the most feared man in MMA. Now, he's Chuck, a man with fading memories, limited income, and kids who are growing up while he wrestles with his own identity. He wants to be a father, a mentor, a legacy worth remembering, but lately, he's just trying to hold on. As of now, Chuck Liddell's life is stuck in a strange purgatory. Not rich, not poor, not famous, not forgotten. He exists in flashes. A guest at a UFC event here, a random podcast appearance there, but never long enough to recapture the aura he once commanded. The man who helped build the UFC from underground blood sport into a billion-dollar empire has been largely sidelined by the very organization he put on the map. Chuck's fans still love him. You can see it in the comments anytime he posts online, but even there, the praise is laced with sadness. "You still got it, Iceman," one fan commented recently on a clip of him shadow boxing. But the truth was clear. He didn't. His movements were stiff, his form awkward, his energy drained. The heart was there, but the body just wasn't. He's tried to pivot to other ventures, acting, coaching, endorsements, but nothing has stuck. He's no longer marketable in the traditional sense. He's not controversial enough to go viral, not articulate enough for commentary, and not healthy enough to compete. He lives on old fight highlights and past interviews, clips that keep his legacy alive while reminding everyone, including himself, how far he's fallen. But perhaps the most tragic thing about Chuck Liddell isn't that he lost his money, his fame, or even his health. It's that he doesn't know how to let go. Like so many warriors before him, he was defined by combat, by victory, violence, and adrenaline. And without that, he's just a man, alone, aging, and unsure of where to go next. In the end, Chuck's story isn't just a fall from grace. It's a cautionary tale about how the fight doesn't always end in the cage, about how silence can be louder than cheers, and about how even legends, once larger than life, can slowly fade into the shadows of the very world they helped build. Even when Chuck Liddell walks into a room today, people still recognize him, but the double takes come with hesitation now. It's not the same Iceman. It's a man who looks like a fading photograph of someone once feared. Time has done what no fighter ever could. It's broken him slowly, piece by piece, quietly, and without mercy. He's tried to smile through it, tried to pretend that things are still good, but even his eyes give it away. There's pain there, not just from the knockouts or surgeries or scar tissue, but from being forgotten by the machine he helped build. There's no grand UFC tribute for Chuck, no commentary desk seat, no foundation in his name. He's not selling out arenas or mentoring new champions. And as the years pass, his name risks becoming just a trivia fact. The guy with the mohawk who used to knock people out. But Chuck was more than that. He was a pioneer, a force, a king who was never given a throne to retire on. He once said in an interview, "I don't want to live a boring life. I want to look back and say, that was wild." And maybe he got that wish. But now, sitting in a house that echoes more than it laughs, laughs, watching highlight reels that hurt more than they inspire. One has to wonder if he would trade some of that wildness for peace, for something or someone to fight for again.